The county assessor's file listed the value of the property as 0. Not low, not negligible. 11 acres of Kentucky ridgeline, a collapsing ranger's cabin, and a rusted observation tower nobody had climbed in 7 years. The whole parcel written off as a demolition candidate, $280. For the land, nothing for the structures. It was the only item in the entire settlement that her ex-husband's attorney didn't bother contesting, because fighting for 0 costs money, and 0 is worth exactly what it sounds like. So at 39 years old, with $940 in a checking account, a pickup truck with a cracked dashboard, and only 100 and Stefonte miles on it, and absolutely nowhere left in the world she wanted to be, Nora Calloway drove 4 hours into the Cumberland Hills to sell the thing, and put the whole miserable chapter of her life behind her. She meant to be gone by nightfall. She wasn't. On her first night alone in that cold, half-dark cabin, she lit an old oil lamp she found on the kitchen shelf, and set it in the window, out of pure instinct, the kind of instinct that bypasses thought entirely, and lives. Somewhere older in the body and the bone, she didn't know in that moment that she had just repeated something her father had done every single night for 27 years, without missing once. She didn't know that the lamp in the window meant something. She didn't know it had always meant something. She found out 4 days later. She was pulling up a warped floorboard near the iron stove using a kitchen knife as a lever, half expecting rot, half expecting nothing, when the blade caught the edge of something deliberate, a seam to clean for age. A cut too straight for accident. Nora knelt on the cold floor and worked the board loose with both hands, and felt it give with a dry woody resistance, and underneath, in a cavity between the floor joists, dry sealed from the weather dark, as a held secret, she found what her father had never once mentioned to a living soul. Not to his friends, not to the county, not to his own daughter, who had spent every summer of her childhood 15 feet above it and never knew it was there. What was in that floor would make Nora Calloway understand, for the first time in her life, exactly who her father had been. And it would make her understand, in the same terrible and clarifying instant, how thoroughly she had never known him at all. The attorney's office smelled like printer ink and recycled air, the kind of room designed to make loss feel procedural. Nora sat in a padded chair, while a man named Ferris read the settlement terms in the flat, uninflected voice of someone reciting a parts list. Marcus wasn't present. Head sent his own attorney, instead younger, sharper suit folder, color-coded, with little adhesive flags, who checked his phone twice before the proceedings even began, and did not quite meet Nora's eyes when he explained that Mr. Calloway sent his regrets. His regrets, Nora said. The attorney slid a pen across the table, without commenting, 5 signatures for initials. 14 years of marriage compressed into a stapled document she could have posted for the price of a stamp she signed, where the flags told her to. The attorney ran a finger down the asset column. The house on Merritt Drive, the joint savings, the retirement account, the newer car, all remaining with Mr. Calloway. Then he tapped a single line near the bottom and nearly passed over it. "This last parcel transfers to you," he said. "Real property, Harlan County, a cabin of some kind." He glanced up briefly. "There are back taxes outstanding." "What's it worth?" Nora asked. The attorney almost smiled. "The county has the structure assessed at nothing, $280 for the land itself." He clicked his pen. Mr. Calloway's position was that it wasn't worth the cost of disputing. That was the most honest thing said in that room all day, even if it wasn't meant honestly. The cabin was hers, because no one else could manufacture a reason to want it. She carried her box to the truck, a cardboard box containing a mixing bowl that had been her mother's, a wristwatch with a dead battery, and a photograph of her father in his ranger's uniform, squinting into sun she couldn't see. And she sat behind the wheel for a long time, with the engine off and the parking lot quiet around her. She had no apartment. She had left her job 3 years ago to follow Marcus to a city she had never chosen. She had no friends who had not started as his. What she had was a folded deed on the passenger seat, soft at the creases from years in a county filing cabinet, and 4 hours of road between her and a mountain she hadn't stood on since she was 17. She drove west. The city thinned out the interstate, became a state route, became a county road, became a forest track, climbing into the Cumberlands. Through tunnels of oak and hemlock, the trees carrying their last autumn, at the edges rust and amber bleeding into the dark green. Nora cracked the window, and let the mountain air in it smelled like wet stone, and wood smoke from somewhere far off. And beneath everything, that older smelled, the one that lives in high places, where the wind comes from nowhere you can name. Her whole body remembered it before her mind did. The cabin was smaller than memory said it should be, and rougher. One window patched with plywood, the porch sagging badly at the near corner where a post had rotted through at the base, moss climbing the north wall with the slow patience of things that have time on their side. The county assessor had called it a teardown, and the assessor had not been wrong. And yet the walls stood square, the tin roof showed no daylight. When Nora finally crossed the dead grass and put her key in the door and stepped inside, the smell that came out to meet her was cedar and cold ash and the particular staleness of a room that has been carefully sealed against the weather. Not abandoned, preserved. Her father's coat hung on a peg by the door, canvas faded to the color of dried leaves, a forestry service patch on the shoulder worn thin at the edges. Nora pressed her face into it before she thought about doing it. It still smelled like wood smoke, and the cold, clean nothing of high altitude. She stood there a long time, with her face in a dead man's coat, and did not cry because she had done her crying already in a guest room, while Marcus slept 3 doors down, with the door shut, and that particular resource had run dry. On the kitchen shelf she found 3 coffee mugs. One man living alone needs 1 mug. She noticed that she filed it without understanding it yet. She stayed the night. She told herself it was the road. Nobody sensible drives a mountain track after dark. But the truer thing was that she didn't want to leave the smell of the coat. She built a fire in the iron stove the way her father had taught her when she was 9, and she sat on the hearthstones while the cabin warmed and the darkness outside pressed against the windows like something patient. She lit the lamp, set it in the window. The small flame doubled in the dark glass and threw a soft yellow circle across the room, and Nora sat at the plank table in the light of it with coffee shed, found in a sealed tin, and thought, for the first time in 14 years, that no one in the world knew exactly where she was. That thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like setting down a weight she had carried so long, she had forgotten she was carrying it. She woke before dawn, 2 footsteps crossing frost-deafened grass outside. Deliberate footsteps, the sound of something said on the porch, then silence. Nora came down from the sleeping loft with the iron fireplace poker in her hand and put her eye to the gap where the patched window met the frame. A young man stood at the tree line, very still, staring at the chimney smoke with an expression she would later recognize as pure bewilderment. 17, maybe 18, canvas coat, too large for his frame. An armload of splitwood head just stacked on the porch, as if this were a routine head maintained for some time. He didn't run, he didn't come forward, he just stood in the cold with his breath smoking and stared at the smoke from a chimney that had been cold for 13 months. "I didn't know anyone was here," he called out. Nora opened the door with the poker, forgotten at her side. "Who are you?" The boy's name was Cabe Tilson. It took him 3 days, and considerable silence to give her even that. It was on the 5th day, moving the iron stove 3 inches to true up the hearth, that Nora found it. She had levered the stove off its stones with a fence post and a length of pipe, sweating despite the cold. And when she swept the exposed floor to reset the hearthstones, the broom caught on a seam. Not a gap, a seam straight-edged, deliberate, running clean along the side of a single floor plank where it met its neighbor, too precise for accident, too clean for age. She knelt and ran her fingers along it, the way she'd been running her fingers along the cabin's other small secrets all week. The plank wasn't nailed, it was cut to lift. She worked the blade of her pocket knife into the seam and pried, and the board came up with a dry wooden scrape that sounded almost like a sigh, and beneath it was a cavity in the floor joists, clean, dry, cold, dark, the size of a small steamer trunk. The smell that rose from it was paper and old metal and something else, something that felt absurdly like a held breath. Inside, 3 leather-bound ledgers, fat and soft-cornered, stacked one on the other. A green metal cash box of the kind sold in hardware stores everywhere, and a coffee tin, the large kind, 3 pounds, its lid sealed with a strip of friction tape, and far heavier than coffee had any right to be. Nora lifted the top ledger with both hands. The leather was worn dark and smooth, where thousands of thumbs had opened it over the years. When she turned back, the cover, the first page, was filled with her father's handwriting, small, square, slanting, just slightly uphill, dated September 3rd, 1981. She read the first entry by the gray window light, then she sat down on the floor because her legs stopped working. September 3rd, 1981. A man named Gerald Foss walked up the road tonight carrying nothing but a paper bag. said had driven his truck into Harlan Creek 2 miles south and walked away from it on purpose. Fed him. He talked until 3 in the morning about a debt he owed a man he was afraid of. I didn't ask questions, and he seemed to need that most of all. He slept in the loft, drove him to the bus station in the morning, told him the lamp stays lit if he ever needs it again. Nora turned the page. 3 weeks later, a different name, a different story. A woman and 2 small children. One bruise she wouldn't explain, given the loft for a night, and gas money, and a phone number for a women's shelter in Lexington. Then a runaway boy of 16, hungry and hypothermic, warmed and fed, and driven by her father himself to the one deputy in the county her father trusted to handle the situation gently. Page after page after page. Names, dates, circumstances, and at the end of nearly every entry in some form or another, the same sentence. The lamp stays lit, the door's not locked, told them they could come back. She began reading them aloud. It felt wrong to let words that quiet go back into silence a second time. Cabe came in from the woodpile and stood in the doorway without taking off his coat and listened. When she reached an entry with no name, only initials, and the single line, "Thank you for not asking me anything," the boy turned and walked back out onto the porch, and Nora let him go and didn't follow. Some things a person needs to feel in the cold where no one is watching. She understood now what the cabin had been trying to tell her all week. 3 coffee mugs for a man who lived alone, a second mattress rolled in the loft corner hooks, at different heights on the porch, beam-sized for different packs. Her father had run a refuge from this mountain for 27 years. He had fed strangers, housed them, listened to the things they couldn't say to anyone else. And he had written every single one of them down, not as charity, not as debt, but as a life worth recording, and he had never said one word about it. Not to the county, not to the newspaper, not to his own daughter, who had spent every summer of her childhood on this mountain and slept 15 feet above his secret without ever knowing it existed. She opened the coffee tin. 61 letters. She counted them twice because the number felt important in a way she couldn't explain. 61 letters in 61 different hands, on notebook paper, and church bulletins, and feed store receipts, and the inside of a torn cereal box. All of them addressed in one form or another to the man on the mountain with the lamp in his window. The man in the silver truck arrived 11 days after Nora found the ledgers. She heard the engine before she saw the vehicle. A deep, expensive note that her old pickup could never have produced climbing. The broken blacktop of the forest road, with the unhurried ease of a machine built for something better than this. A large, clean pickup with a dealer's plate still in the window, pulled into the clearing and stopped directly in front of the porch steps, like a flag being planted. The man who got out didn't belong on Harrow Peak, and knew it, and didn't care. 50 maybe, in good boots that had never seen mud, with the particular smile of someone who has already decided how a conversation ends. His name was Garrison Peel. Highland Summit Properties. He had made her father for offers over 11 years, he explained. Each one generous, given what the county assessed the land at, and her father had declined all 4, without ever providing a reason a businessman could work with. He turned a slow circle, taking in the saddle between the 2 ridgelines, the view falling away blue to the east, where 3 counties folded into each other. On a clear day, and named a number then, when that didn't move her face, named a larger one. "I'm told you're in a difficult position," Peel said pleasantly. That was Marcus's phrase, the soft little blade of it, the way smallness was always dressed up as concern. Nora felt the old reflex rise, 14 years of conditioning the instinct to soften, to agree to make a room comfortable at the cost of herself. Then she felt the lamp behind her in the window. The 61 letters in the tin, her father's handwriting, slanting slightly uphill. The door's not locked. Dell, it never was. The reflex died where it stood. "This property isn't for sale," Nora said. "It wasn't when he was alive, it isn't now." Peel's smile changed quality. He mentioned fire code violations. A wood stove 40 years out of compliance, a question about the forest road easement that gave her access to the parcel at all. He set a business card on the porch rail, since she wouldn't take it from his hand, and said that his attorneys could spend 2 years making the property impossible to keep, for less money than she'd ever be likely to see. "People in your position usually do the arithmetic," he said through the truck window. On his way out, they always do. The answer came up the mountain the following afternoon. An older woman in a wool coat, reading glasses on a chain leather briefcase worn soft from decades of serious rooms. Shed heard from the county deputy that Nora was on the mountain, and Shed heard that a man with a silver truck had been asking questions at the courthouse about the access easement, and the combination of those two things had gotten her out of a warm chair she'd been intending to die in. Her name was Vera Stanton. She'd been an attorney in Harlan County for 30 years before she quit. She sat at the plank table and ran her hand along the wood, and was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "My son, he was 19, and in a very bad way. I won't put words to. He drove up here in the dark, because someone told him there was an old man on Harrow Peak who'd sit with you and not call anyone you didn't want. Called your father, kept him 3 days. Walked the ridgeline with him, didn't lecture him, didn't tell me. Just kept the light on, and kept my boy breathing until my boy could do it himself. Hayes 43 now, 2 daughters, an architect, down in Bowling Green." She put her glasses on, and her voice steadied. "So when I tell you I'm going to handle the man in the silver truck, I'd like you to understand. I've been waiting 24 years for the chance to do something for the man who did that for my son. You'd be doing me the kindness by letting me." Nora showed her everything, the ledgers, the cash box, the tin of 61 letters. The old attorney went very quiet looking at it all. She read 3 of the letters and had to stop. Then she put her professional face back on, and went through Garrison Peel's threats one by one, and removed the air from each like a mechanic diagnosing a blown tire, methodical, unhurried, certain. But then she asked one question that mattered more than all the others. "Did your father ever do anything with the development rights to this land?" The brass key in the cash box had been bothering Nora since the first day, a key that fit nothing in the cabin. And she remembered suddenly a summer afternoon, 17 years old, sitting in the observation tower with her father, while a woman in a green vest with a clipboard climbed the metal stairs, her father shaking the woman's hand, the woman saying something about her recording her father's voice, a voice Nora had filed away and forgotten for 22 years. "There, that's settled. Nobody can touch it after I'm gone." 2 days later, in the deed books at the county courthouse, they found it. Recorded 19 years before her father died, with no announcement and no explanation to anyone. Elias Calloway had granted the development rights to all 11 acres of the Harrow Peak parcel to the Cumberland Highlands Land Conservancy. In perpetuity, the land could never be subdivided. It could never host a commercial structure. The cabin that stood on it could remain in nothing larger forever, by a deed restriction that ran with the land regardless of who owned it, regardless of what anyone offered, regardless of how many silver trucks came up the forest road. He had given away for nothing, 19 years before he died, the exact thing Garrison Peel had driven up the mountain to buy. Vera Stanton let Nora sit with that for a moment, then she said, "He knew about this easement, you understand. A title search turns it up in an afternoon. He came to that porch knowing he couldn't build on this land. What he was really betting on was that you didn't know what you had, that you were broke and grieving and alone, and would take $12,000 to make him disappear, and then once the land was his head, go to the Conservancy, always short on funding, always stretched thin, and make them an offer to amend the easement, a bigger parcel somewhere. A check they couldn't say no to. It happens," she tapped the deed book, "he was counting on 2 things: that the heir was ignorant, and that the Conservancy could be purchased. He was wrong on both counts." "And who," Nora asked slowly, "runs the Conservancy now?" Vera turned a page. "A woman named Ruth Ann Foss took the director's seat 6 years ago. Her husband Gerald drove his truck into Harlan Creek in 1981 and walked away from it on purpose, and walked up a mountain instead, looking for a lamp in a window." Nora found Gerald Foss's entry in the first ledger, the very first page, September 3rd, 1981. The Conservancy would never release the easement. It had been placed there by the man who had once kept Gerald Foss, breathing through the worst night of his life, and no acreage on earth was worth more to Ruth Ann Foss than that. Garrison Peel came back up the mountain 8 days later. This time he didn't get out of the truck. Vera Stanton walked down off the porch steps in her wool coat and passed a manila envelope through the window, and said something quiet and precise that Nora couldn't hear. She watched the back of Peel's neck go red, watched him pull the recorded easement halfway out of the envelope and push it back, watched him say something sharp, and watched Vera answer with the absolute serenity of a woman who had been waiting 24 years and had all the time remaining in the world. The window went up the silver truck, backed carefully down off the saddle for the last time, and did not return. Nora stayed. She had come up the mountain with $940 and a plan to leave by nightfall. Somewhere between the loose floorboard and the deed book, she had stopped looking for the exit. She took a part-time job at the hardware store in the valley town to keep the propane filled. She learned the observation. Tower radio on clear mornings, she keyed it at dawn and read the weather to the whole district in a slow, flat voice, the way her father had, even when no one was on duty to hear it, because a channel ought to have a human sound in it in case someone out there was listening and needed one. And every evening before anything else, she filled the oil lamp and trimmed the wick and set it in the window where it had sat for 27 years, so that anyone coming up the worst road in the county on the worst night of their life would have somewhere to walk toward. She started a new ledger, didn't tell anyone. Just took a fresh leather book from the hardware store shelf, the closest she could find to the old ones, and tucked her father's last letter inside the front cover and waited. She didn't wait long. On a night in early April, cold rain, coming sideways off the ridge headlights she didn't recognize, crawled up the last switchback and stopped in the clearing. A young woman climbed out in a soaked jacket, too thin for the weather, and lifted a small, sleeping child from the back seat and held him against her shoulder. She looked at the smoke from the chimney and the single lamp burning in the window, and then at Nora in the doorway. She had the expression Nora had seen on other faces and once for 14 years in her own mirror. "I saw the light," the woman said. "I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone I can go." "You can't go," Nora said. "It's coming down too hard, and that boy's asleep. Come in out of it, there's a fire, there's something on the stove, the loft's made up." The woman didn't move for a moment. "Why?" she said. Nora smiled. "My father used to get asked that," she said. "Come inside." She fed them and warmed them and did not ask a single question. The woman didn't want to answer in the morning after the rain had blown through, and the woman had gone on toward a sister's house with a full tank of gas and $40 folded into her coat pocket. Nora sat at the plank table and opened the new ledger and wrote the date and a name and the circumstances in a hand that slanted just slightly uphill the way her father's always had. At the end of it, the only line that had ever mattered: "The lamp stays lit, the door's not locked," told her she could come back. Cabe read it over her shoulder, something he would never have done 4 months ago, and was quiet a while. "He'd have liked that you kept it the same," he said. "He'd have liked that you stayed," Nora said. The boy went still the way he did when something moved through him that he didn't have words for. Then he nodded once and went out to split wood in the clearing of a mountain that could never be sold under a tower the right man had watched 100 square miles of green from, and Nora watched him from the window and understood at last what her father had actually left her. Not 11 acres, not a cabin, the county valued at nothing. A lamp, a list of everyone it had ever guided home, and the simplest instruction a person can receive: keep it burning. Don't make a fuss about it. The road comes up to the door is not locked. It never was.